to really deeply understand what was actually going on. So something that's important is to not just listen, but to actually hear what's not said and what's not expressed. Because I think that's where you get to deep listening. It's not just hearing the words or the narratives or the stories people share. It's also knowing what's not said, what's actually done. I love it when things don't quite make sense and there's gaps and there's like little sort of paradoxes, because that's where you actually find a lot of interesting insights.
Welcome to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for people like you who care about the social impact of conscious companies and everyday heroes. Hear inspiring stories from those who put people and planet before profit and personal gain. You'll learn how you can make a difference, vote with your dollars, and get involved today. Here's your host, Corinna Bellizzi.
Hello and welcome to Care More, Be Better, a Circle B podcast. Each week, I invite you to care more so that together we can create a better world. We're just returning from my holiday break with our first episode of the new year, and I couldn't be more thrilled to be back in this saddle as I introduce you to today's guest, my friend, Jun-Jo Lee. I met Jun-Jo Lee at the largest natural foods show in the industry last spring, Natural Products Expo West in Anaheim. There, she presented her very interesting, groundbreaking ethnographic research on how Generation Z connects with food. Jun is a food ethnographer. She studies how and why we eat for food-related businesses. She calls food her portal to understand generational shifts and tracks early signals of what our future has entailed for us. She is also an author of some really incredible picture books, including Chef Roy Choi, which has become a favorite of my kids, as well as is a co-founder of the publisher that brings you these works, including Farmer Eva's Green Garden Life, which has also become another favorite of mine. Now, this work enables people to integrate their understanding of food and culture into the walls of their home. Since she lives near me, we've had the chance to connect in person a few times since last spring, spending time browsing markets in San Francisco and enjoying some beautiful wild foraged morel mushrooms that she grilled up for me at home. I even got a behind-the-scenes peek for what it might look like to explore food experiences when I attended an event at Google. She served as their resident food ethnographer for the last 10 years. Jun-Jo Lee, welcome to the show.
Hi. So good to see you again, Corinna.
I have to say I've missed you.
I have too. It's fun when you have a friend who's as into food as you are. Not just personally through enjoyment, but also professionally through work.
Yeah. I mean, we both put so much of our lives into this space too. And really just to understand that you are bringing this message forward in so many different ways through collaborations with executives, and then also through your recent TED Talk, which I believe just got published about a month ago. So I'd love to start our catch-up session there and learn what this whole experience was like. I've got the title here. It's Our Savory, Spicy, Significant Relationship with Food. I've watched it about, 4 or 5 times. It's great. So what was it like?
Yeah, it was very professional. And it was a special section of the TED Talks focused on climate changing and the fact that we are at a crisis right now. And so they did a special episode on food. It was wonderful. It was in New York City at TED headquarters, and they gathered people from around the world who work in food. And then they had speakers, and I was included on the speaker list. But before we even started speaking, we went on field trips throughout New York City, arranged by this organization. And I got to go visit the Green Bronx machine up in Bronx.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was incredible. to see the work that people are doing throughout the city in all different ways, from education to growing and more. So much more.
Now, your TED Talk is essentially, I would call it like the condensed version of the talk that I got to see you give at Expo West 2024, which really helped, I think, for me to understand relationship of food intergenerationally and how we can better even connect with our kids. I'm a mom too, but my kids are a little younger than yours. They're 7 and 10. How do you really take on this work as a food ethnographer? And what might we learn from what you've already been able to put out into the world?
Yeah. So for me, ethnography has been my lifelong journey to listen. And I think the first place where everyone needs to listen is to themselves. And I was born in Seoul, Korea, in 1970. And I had very, very strong parents. And I fought for the first quarter of my life to be heard. And so for me, my whole career as a food ethnographer, as an ethnographer, I started my professional career out in food at the Hartman Group in Bellevue, Washington. I applied food ethnography to consumer research. That's where I started learning how to listen. And I started learning how to listen to what people wanted. So I never knew how to listen to what I wanted. What do I want? But I learned how to listen to what other people wanted. And then I formalized it somewhere in my 40s and was able to leave the Hartman Group, became food ethnographer. And this was always also at a time when my kids were in their teens in high school and then transitioning to college. And they would say to me, Mom, you don't get it. You know, we would have fights at the dinner table because I didn't get it. I didn't get them. And so I decided to apply my deep listening skills to my kids. But of course, it's really hard to talk to your kids. And so I started asking other Gen Zers their age, what is your flavor of home? You know, what are your food rules? How are you learning to care more about food? And I started to learn about this generation, our children's generation, and it became formalized into a cohort study. So that's what I shared during my TED Talk, was really how I learned how to listen and how I transformed my life through ethnography and saved my relationship with my kids through my professional work.
You know, I think that we have spent so long trying to learn to be heard that we somehow forget to listen. And I wonder if there's, was your approach or coming at food ethnography and this type of research, did you get to better listening by learning to ask questions differently? Like, what would you say are the methods that you employed? Because even as I listened to your TED Talk, right, you encourage people to ask questions like, what's your flavor of home? Or how does this particular food from your culture and history make you feel? And really to get at the core of not only somebody's relationship with food, but culture and how they relate to one another through food. So it caused me to really sit and reflect on that. Is it the questions we're asking? What is it that helps you to become a better listener, just generally speaking? Because I think we could all apply this.
Yeah. Well, it took about 11 years doing consumer research. And the way the industry market research does consumer research is we have like a recruiter who finds specific consumer segments that we're interested in based on where they live, income, are they buyers of a certain brand or not, or a category participant. And then what the Hartman Group did, really what Harvey Hartman did, was apply anthropology, cultural anthropology. So think about consumers through a cultural lens versus a psychosocial lens. So rather than asking about needs and aspirations as an individual, we started asking it as cultural anthropologists, trying to see the shared and common patterns. And so I got 11 years to practice with a whole lot of people all across America and beyond. And as I was asking them these questions, I realized the questions that my clients were interested in, like, do they like this color, that? What do they want more of, less of? I could actually get consumers to answer it in the last 10 minutes. But the most important part was to build trust and rapport, go deep in. And so one of the questions that really helps me get deep in is to ask them about their past. So really understanding their past context of what food was like growing up for them gave me a lot of threads to follow. So first, I was able to understand where they grew up, what their cultural or ethnic lineage was, if they grew up in a home that had strong food involvement or not. It just reveals a lot. And so I somehow understood that when I deeply listen to them and follow the consumer, because they're the expert of their own lives, rather than try to educate, or that they shared and revealed a lot to me. And so then I was able to ask all the client questions in about 10 minutes at the end of the interview or throughout the interview, but that I would get better results when I just listened and followed the consumer as they were starting to retell their story of their life through food. And I realized when they do that, you actually learn so deeply about who they are, but also that you can start seeing the patterns of who we are as a culture, American culture, through the lens of food.
Yeah. Well, I think that's beautiful. And one of the things that gets me thinking about, because I've also done a bit of market research, is that when you take an ethnographic or a cultural perspective to a lot of this research, you often are following people and their habits. Like I've done ethnographic reviews of consumers of products for brands that I've worked with that literally followed them into their home to see what their patterns were like in different spaces, which of course is incredibly expensive to conduct research that way. And not all companies are willing to dedicate the amount of resources required to really do that, at least not until they get quite large. I wondered if your research took you from, let's say, more of an interview perspective into their homes, or how it was differed over the years.
Oh, yeah. So during my years when I was at the Hartman Group, we didn't do longitudinal research, qualitative research. You would want to speak to a unique consumer. And we had about 2.5 hours with them, a little more sometimes, but depending on the nature of the client's questions, we would meet at a grocery store and ask them to actually shop a certain category, or let's say box salads, and then really follow them and listen closely and see how they're choosing, see their line of reasoning.
Yeah, why did they pick up one box versus the other, and which was their favorite brand, and
How do they actually? So this was in situ. And then sometimes we would even follow them to their homes and have them prepare a meal and just truly understand what's in their pantry, how they make choices along the decision tree of, how they get dinner on the table, for example. I remember another study, it was focused on convenience foods, convenience store foods, snack foods. And so I would ride in minivans with moms and see how, from the house to the store and back again, and see how snacks were used with their kids. Yeah, all kinds of ways to really deeply understand what was actually going on. So something that's important is to not just listen, but to actually hear what's not said and what's not expressed. So, because I think that's where you get to deep listening. It's not just hearing the words or the narratives or the stories people share. It's also knowing what's not said, what's actually done. I love it when things don't quite make sense and there's gaps and there's like little sort of paradoxes, because that's where you actually find a lot of interesting insights.
Certainly. And the melange of people's flavors and tastes also comes from multiple perspectives, right? The reasons they like something, they may not even really know it. And maybe you can actually help them reveal that too through your research. It's really fun. I mean, as somebody who comes from a cultural anthropology background, I find it all fascinating. Now, through getting to know you, I've heard you suggest that the best diet, or maybe not the best diet, that might not be the correct way to state it, or I might be oversimplifying, but something like the best diet for you is your ethnographic diet. So, what is an ethnographic diet? How would you identify that? And how might this bring more to your life?
Yeah, it's really interesting. There's actually, let me show people. I have this very old copy of a 1955 Life issue that was
Looks like a Norman Rockwell.
Yeah, it was born. It was 20 cents an issue at the time in 1955. So it was post-war, and the person who gave me her copy, she was part of the Organic Standards Boards back from representing PCC. And this ad, which is less fattening.
And it shows 3 teaspoons of Domino sugar, contains fewer calories than 3 small tomatoes.
Yeah. And so what the subtext is actually saying is that three teaspoons of Domino sugar is less fattening, is healthier than eating 3 small tomatoes. And so that's when I started realizing, wow, what is really healthy?
Power of advertising.
What is really healthy? It's a cultural filter. So what we think is good to eat is really determined by our culture and what we collectively believe in.
You were recently the lead author in an article that was published in the journal Nutrients about how standard patient history can be improved using ethnographic food life questions. I wondered if you could talk about that for a moment and just tell us what you learned and perhaps how this might be reshaping a bit of how people approach medicine.
Yeah, the article was inspired by David Eisenberg, who's also a co-author. David is a part of Harvard School of Public Health, and he is both a physician as well as a founder of Teaching Kitchens Collaborative. And as a physician, he believes that so many of our unwellness, dis-ease, and illness stems from chronic conditions around our relationship with food. And that the current medical education system doesn't reflect all the ways in which patients actually have a relationship with food in their lives. The way that medical education approaches food is really through weight, height, and tell me a typical diet. And maybe they'll ask you to eat more fruits and vegetables, watch your sugar, watch your salt and cholesterol. But it's very quantitative approach. It's
kind of cold, right? And guilt prone.
Yeah, can be, right?
Mm-hmm.
So typically when you go see your physician, they start asking you these questions, and typical inside the thought bubble of patients is, why should I tell you? Or
they'll just fib, like often people don't feel comfortable telling the truth about their habits because they fear judgment or that it will somehow impact the doctor's perspective of them when they only get like 10 minutes with them or something to that effect. There's not as long of a relationship as, our grandparents developed with their doctors. It's a much different world now.
Yeah. And so David and I and our other co-authors thought, what if we had an ethnographic approach to asking these questions? What if we built rapport and had the food history be a part of a getting to know, of a building trust and mutual respect, and to really start getting a sense of what was going on in people's lives? Essentially, from my perspective, it is applying the techniques that market researchers and brands and the food industry has used for, many, many decades to understand the basic needs and desires and aspirations of their consumer at a deep level, in order to design and sell and produce products, food products. What if physicians started, just like borrowing some of that way of getting to know who their patients were through the portal of food? And so the way that we designed the 3 questions was to start in the past, have the patient reflect something about their past. What is the flavor of home growing up? And then bring them into the present moment. What are your food rules or your approach to food? Do you have a food philosophy? Which brings them into the present moment. So it's not asking them what they eat on a typical week, but it's starting to get into what they think is good to eat and what is not. And then it's asking the patient to join them on a journey, if the physicians can join the patient in their journey of some future state. So the 3rd question is, how are you learning to care more about food? Because as a researcher, we know people are always trying something at least new or different, or have something in mind. And so rather than telling the patient what they should be doing, it's saying, what are you thinking you might be interested in? Some possibility of change, and asking for permission to explore that change with the patient.
I think this was what I was trying to get at with my question about what an ethnographic food is, or what an ethnographic diet might be, because in the time that I've known you, I've asked myself this question actually with relative frequency, like, what is an ethnographic diet? What does it mean? What would my ethnographic diet be if I was to line one out, something to that effect? And when I think about food from that kind of a culture perspective, I was going to say there's a diet for each person that reflects on their culture. It really got me thinking about what comfort foods were to me, what foods I had discovered on my own in my life that I felt like somehow identified me separate from the path of my growing up, and then what my food aspirations might be. And then thinking about how this then layers into the person that I hope to become, or the person that I hope to help my children become. Like, not only the way I feed them, but the experiences I put in front of them, or how I teach them to cook, and the types of spices that I might use that my mother never braved, and those sorts of things. Like, as I discover cultures around the world, and like I develop a penchant for Indian food, and then decide I have to learn to make naan myself as an example, because I love breads so much. It really caused me to think about separating myself from these ideas of guilt, even around bread, as an example, because I also derive so much enjoyment from bread. And you're told things like, oh, these are empty calories. But a good whole wheat food like sourdoughs can be incredibly nutritious and also support good gut bacteria. We're told so many things as these fads and trends come up too, like this is somehow villainized. And then, you find out later that the tomato is a lot more healthy than the teaspoon of sugar, right? So I just wondered
Or
if
is
you
it?
could.
I don't know. I
You
mean,
don't know.
this idea of healthy is so subjective, right? It really depends. And healthy has been used to push so much food by grandmothers and mothers and doctors and food marketers. Like, if you say it's healthy, that's sort of like a way to get people to eat a certain way.
Hmm.
And so I think for me, the ethnographic diet is really starting to trust your own body and to listen to yourself and to listen to your family and your friends and to start by listening without judgment. So that's sort of the beginning of what ethnography is. It's like you suspend your own judgment, even analysis, and you listen deeply to someone else without judgment, without like trying to say, is that, scientifically proven truth or, and you suspend your own judgment about food. Like this is how you start. And you just listen and try to image and feel and sense and taste what the other person is describing without judgment. And then you really enter into their experience. You embrace their experience and you enter fully into their lives through food. And what you realize is it actually doesn't really matter what we're eating. It matters in how our relationship with food is. Are we experiencing joy? Do you have joy with the bread, with the non bread? Is it the baking part? Why Indian food? What are the flavors? What are the spicings that remind you of something that you've had in the past? Or some moment in your time where maybe you experienced great transformation, like you grew and you learned, and that flavor is associated with a certain point in your life. And that's why you like it. I don't know, but you start listening to these. And as you start listening, you start understanding someone deeply. And, hopefully you can also start understanding yourself, because food is a reflection, it's a mirror. It's a question that I often ask is, mirror, mirror on your spoon, what is a loving mouthful? What is a loving spoonful? But while I'm listening to you, I'm also thinking about, that same sensation and love that I might have experienced sometime in my past. So it's just this way of opening up conversation to deeply listen and to deeply be heard. And I think that's the nourishment, because what we decide is good to eat or not, I think we've all experienced this changing in waves, depending on what the latest best story about food is.
As we just go through this conversation, I was thinking about the books that you're bringing into the world, the stories that you're working to tell that are in themselves food ethnographies, right? Like the children's book, Chef Roy Choi, which is an exploration of a different take on tacos and how his whole story came to be, really kind of integrating not only his culture, but with his love of food and this whole concept of something that is a bit of a comfort food. Like people love tacos in this way, right? And then bringing it to people through his taco trucks and then telling the story in a very artful way with his voice and with art and bringing people on this journey to understand the flavors of cuisine that were brought from Sonma, I think is how you say it. I'm not familiar with the mush. The flavors in our fingertips. It is the love and cooking talent that Korean mothers and grandmothers mix into their handmade foods. Like bringing these essences of culture, not only from a language perspective, but just the love of food into the food that is being made, that is then being given out through his taco trucks around all of the Los Angeles area. And this book, the reason I'm bringing this up too, has become a favorite of my kids. My son Benedict brought it out 2 days ago because he wanted to read it to his younger brother. And he's at a stage now where he can do that. And, I feel really good about it. And he enjoys it. And then he asks me about this map and, like, where are these places? And can we go to where Chef Roy Choi's trucks are? Which this week caused us to go into a discussion about the fires in Los Angeles and some of the other challenges that we might be facing. So I really would like to hear how you're bringing story through these generations with individual features like that on Chef Roy Choi or Farmer Ava, who's taking an approach to organic regenerative gardening and really kind of telling these stories, not only to the adults that might be reading them to their kids, but to this next generation.
Yeah. So when I was working at the Hartman Group, I would listen to a lot of people describe their approach to food, what they were avoiding, what they were seeking more of, how they were thinking about meals, how they were thinking about feeding their kids and their children. And I started just really developing my own sense of food rules and an approach to food. And I wanted to share it more broadly.
Yeah.
And I, of course, couldn't share it through the consulting work because our clients were interested in very specific questions. But this general sense of what is good to eat, how should we be eating? I started thinking about it and learning from everyone I was interviewing. And it really is pretty simple. And so I wrote Chef Roy Choi and the Street Food Remix to share like these profound insights that I was learning from the American consumer. And I connected it to my own background, being Korean American. And it starts with 손맛. 손 means hands, and 맛 means taste or flavor. And so it is cooking with 손맛. That would be, which means to cook from the flavors of your grandmas and moms and grandpas, cook with that flavor. Like, how do your kids like things to taste? And to make it to that taste rather than following a recipe online. Mm-hmm. Really, really deeply listening to what your family likes, for example, and cooking to that. And cooking, let's start there.
Yeah, like actually making it at home and having it be part of your experience as a family, how you spend time together.
Right. So cooking
becomes mindful by nature then, right?
That's right. Cooking with 손맛. That is like the first key that unlocked for me. If food is so important and we put so much importance on the role of food in our lives to transform our lives, to, lose weight, be stronger, be healthier, avoid chronic, and yet we spend so little time in the actual preparing of food.
Yeah.
And the industry that I helped was a huge part of that, right? Because we like convenience. We like things to be affordable. We like quick and easy. And so slowly, people started cooking less. And then everybody had to cook to people's preferences because preferences became codified in these dietary lifestyles, or they had to be like considered in terms of allergens and intolerances and all this. Like, we're just learning so much more about the effect of food in our lives. And so then I think we lose confidence and we stop somehow relying on our own ability to listen to what we want, what our body wants, and what our family wants, taste-wise, and what would make our bodies feel better. And so that's what I wanted to share through Chef Roy Choi and the Street Food Remix, was cook more and cook with the flavor in your fingertips.
Gosh, I think so much my life before I truly learned what my own cooking style was to go to a cooking book and always like grab the recipe and feel like you couldn't deviate from it, like, okay, well, I have the recipe, or I get my meal kit in the mail and you have all the ingredients that you're supposed to use, only to learn that my family doesn't like to use quite so much sour cream in a dressing, or they like it a little bit more spicy, or maybe I don't want to use cilantro and I'll substitute something like parsley. When I started to allow myself in my own kitchen a little bit more creative freedom, everybody liked the food more, and I think that
how did you learn that? What did you do? How did you?
I think it was as simple as like when I grew up with my mom cooking, she seemed to be stressed about following certain recipes if she didn't know how to cook something very well. And so was very regimented, and she'd, have all the spoons and cups out and things like that to measure the quantities of things that you would put in. And so it made it kind of nervous thing for me. And when I realized that I could make any soup pretty well, and I would use the inspiration of, gosh, some of my vegetables in the crisper drawer are starting to look a little rubbery. It's time to do something with them. I can go ahead and make a really great soup stock with some of the stuff still and start to experiment with some spices. And I will tell you, sometimes I made something that didn't taste very good, or that the texture wasn't right, or, ended up being a waste, but maybe it would have been waste already anyway, right? I just started allowing myself a little bit more freedom. And I also acknowledged that I really don't like heavily laden fatty foods very much. And so many of the recipes that, will call for a lot of heavy cream or creme fraiche or something like that, just lighten them up a little bit, like not put quite so much of that thing in there. And then I just liked it a little bit more, put a little bit more acid. I liked more of that, perhaps of a sour kick with my foods. My palate isn't super deep French creamy, lots of butter, right? I think I prefer things to have a little bit more tartness and a robust flavor and some spice to them and some heat. I do have to tone that down a bit for my kids, but they're learning to explore with me as I now kind of step into learning to make Indian food, because I've shifted my own dietary habits to be more aligned with plant-based eating, just less meat. So I'm looking for creative ways to bring more proteins in. And so I love garbanzo beans, and I love, you creating different kinds of hummus, and have even begun experimenting with my own recipes there. I'm soaking some dry garbanzo beans right now upstairs, as an example. Learning that I don't like canned garbanzo beans. I really prefer them that way. And
because
just
you can taste it, right? You
because the texture is different.
Texture is different.
Yeah. And the flavor. So like, if for instance, like right now I'm going to be making an Indian inspired, and I say inspired because I have made it my own, but like a lentil stew, and I'll cook it in my slow cooker. So I do wash the lentils. I do use garbanzo beans, but I don't like using the canned beans because it cooks for so long that the canned beans ends up being kind of mushy, right? They already start out kind of mushy, but they become more mushy. So I use the dried beans, right? I can get them organic and they're relatively local to me. So that's all great too. And then the spice mix that we integrate, I find I don't like as much of the cardamom. So I use less of that. And I use more of the turmeric. And then I will dive into a little bit of anise and actually throw some star anise in there. And so I'm kind of developing it and bridging it into something that I both have a better taste preference for, but that my kids will also eat because it's not quite as earthy with the spices that are in there. Or I haven't put quite as much of the cayenne pepper. And then from the other vegetables that I include, it's got, the celery, carrots, and onion that I would typically have in another soup stock. So it has some of that kind of more traditional stuff coming in. But I'm also not using a chicken stock to get me started. It's vegetarian and it's all fresh, right? Limiting at the same time the amount of salt that I use because I don't like super salty soups. And so the end result is something that my older son absolutely loves and he will eat with me all week long. My younger son will have maybe once, and my husband has a distaste for. But you can't please everybody all the time. And I can't customize this kind of a meal because it takes 4 hours to cook to each person. So anyway, developing something I love that my older son also loves and that my younger son is developing for.
Something that I've been thinking about is how lonely recipes are. Like when you look a recipe up and then it has all the ingredients and the quantities. That's how modern recipes are written these days. And then
1 teaspoon of this and half teaspoon of that.
Half teaspoon of that. And then you can actually get maybe even a food app that turns it into a shopping list. And then you go by yourself, shop the food, and then you cook by yourself. Following this recipe, you're not considering what you like, what your older son likes, what your younger son likes, possibly, your husband, or for him, he's going to have to eat according to my taste, this meal. I don't know. You're not considering that. You're just like cooking it, following this recipe. And I love the way you cook, Corinna. It's that really is sunmat. And that 4 hours is truly self-care for yourself and your family. And you're learning about yourself. And then your family that comes around and shares the meal, they know how much effort, maybe they know how much effort you put into it, that love you've put into it. And you've put it in. And so everybody enjoys it. It might not be their favorite meal, but they still gather around the table and enjoy it.
See, I know the thing that would solve it for my husband is if I just stuck a whole chicken in there, he'd be fine. But it's he doesn't like the plant-based food so much. So, but I'm not eating as much of the meat. So I'll do something else for him, which is easier, simpler, and he'll be fine. He'll have a little bit of the soup, but eat the other thing, right? But also just understanding that I'm trying to focus on, like what we were talking about earlier, real foods, like not just something that comes in a box on a shelf and that is pre-prepared with some variety of spices that are somewhat middle of the road. Like I want to create something new. I also have found like this world where people get meal kits delivered. There's not a lot of wiggle room in these recipes, right? Like they ship you things like, okay, there's this many pouches of sour cream and here's the spice packet and here's this and here's that. And a lot of the time it just says like Italian spice blend or something hot blend or whatever. And you don't actually know what's in those things. So even if you loved it, you couldn't identify, oh, well, that was a mix of cayenne and this other spice that I also love, and then learn to cook with that because they almost want to build a reliance on the product that they're selling, right? Like, oh, you'll just keep coming back to this thing and you won't develop necessarily the skills to learn to cook. Yeah, I just think allowing exploration, allowing yourself to fail, it also makes food more interesting. And that's just what I love about it. I will say I probably am addicted to sourdough bread.
Oh, are you? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like anything that I can have with sourdough bread, I would love. So,
why do you feel guilty about bread?
I think because for so long it's drilled in as something that is, like especially white sourdoughs, you you learn, oh, well, gluten and like it's not very nutrient dense, might be stripped of the germs. So the things that have a health benefit in there aren't as present. So it goes to this whole world of healthy, right? Even though I really enjoy it, right? And I know also that sourdough in particular has healthy bacteria in it that support your gut health, that it's something that brings me joy with a little bit of butter on it or soaked in that soup that I'm going to be consuming later. And that alone is its own health benefit, right? Like it brings beauty to your life if you really enjoy it.
Well, um, I don't know. It's strange that we have to justify, you know,
Yeah.
reasons why we like certain foods or not. I'm just curious, why do you like bread?
I I don't know, just always have.
Yeah. When are the moments when reach for bread?
I think it's something that has come with most meals, you know? I grew up in, my father's Italian, right? Sicilian and French, actually, and my mom comes from, like, this Dutch Germanic, background, right? So, there's some form of bread with just about every meal, and my mom also had this thing that she would make, and I don't think I've heard about this from other households, but she would take like a really good sourdough, cut it up, put milk and put it in a glass, like a milk glass, and pour milk in it and stick it in the freezer for a while, and then eat that almost like you would ice cream. But not when it was fully frozen, just when it got like this crust on the top. Like it was this thing that she just liked to do. And I've never heard about other people doing this, but it was something that became a bit of a comfort thing for my little sister and I when we were growing up. I've tried it since. I don't like it. but but it was this interesting thing that was unique to our household. And there's an obvious connection for my mother to breads. When I was growing up, I also learned about things like lavash and tortillas and just like flatbreads. And I loved every kind of bread that had that kind of texture to it that could almost be torn and that might be on its way to being a cracker in a way. Like if you left it out, it might get a little stale and then be like a cracker. So I think it's just related to all of this history, but also portability, functionality goes with almost anything from like, you can make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich with your crackers, I guess, if you wanted to, but like really sourdough goes great. It also goes great with soup. So it's versatile.
When did you first start feeling a little bit uncomfortable about when did bread become tricky for you?
Probably teen years because, you start to worry about like your waistline or something like that, like self-critical perspectives. And the other piece is I have full awareness that when I cut out bread, I'm leaner. So, if you want to be leaner, like, oh, if I cut out bread, I'll be leaner.
Yeah, all of that is tied to it, isn't it?
Hmm.
I love rice, maybe as much as you like bread. I grew up with a rice culture.
Mm.
And I remember someone had asked my friend, who's a nutritionist, but she's Japanese, it said, Japanese eat so much white rice. What's with that? As a nutritionist, can you recommend white rice? And she said, well, rice is precious for her and her culture. And they just eat a small amount,
Yeah.
And then the rice enables you to eat all these other vegetables that come with the fiber and all the things that are supposed to be healthy for us, that we should be eating more of. But it just makes the meal so much more enjoyable and pleasurable. And so I realized, wow, we have these ideas and it keeps us from fully enjoying, the way we want to eat. And does it really make sense? I mean, does it really make sense when you realize all this whole wheat that they're selling to make whole wheat bread is actually fractionalized? It's,
Hmm.
it's separated anyways, and it's just reconstituted. How whole is that? So we have these ideas that whole wheat is better for us and we should be eating more whole wheat. And it sort of neutralizes our guilt about eating carbs, I guess. But when you actually dig a little deeper, and most consumers don't even know this, that's how wheat is stored. It's separated from the germ and the bran, and then it's reconstituted to fit specific fiber requirements on the, nutritional labeling package.
I mean, I even do that. I have wheat germ and wheat bran, and I will do things like make Dutch babies on the weekends for my kids, and I'll add that to it.
A little extra.
Yeah, just add it back in because it's not in the flour that I like to cook with. And, this is probably because I came from a family that baked, right? So I'm very particular about my flour.
Yeah. So
So
you like it a certain
yeah, just a certain quality. And, I do care about if it's organic because I don't want to be responsible for more glyphosate in our environment. I know enough about that to know it's a bad thing. So, buying quality, organic, well-milled flour it's not as simple as just going to Safeway. You have to actually go to a specialty store of some sort, usually. And you're spending sometimes, you could probably get a bag of flour for $3 or $4. I'm spending 10, but it doesn't really shock me or challenge me because I don't use so much of it that $10 feels like it's an overspend, if that makes sense. I'm not a baker of breads. That's funny because I know we spent all this time talking about bread and I love bread, but I'm more of the person that will bake like the cookies for the household or make banana bread when we have too many ripe bananas or make something like dumplings for a chicken dumpling soup from scratch as opposed to getting Bisquick because I don't buy Bisquick, right? Like doing those sorts of things with flour or using it to make a gravy of some sort, just fun stuff that I like to make.
How are you learning to care more about food in your life right now, Corinna? What's interesting to you?
Well, I've been on this journey of being mostly vegetarian for the last year. And so I'm starting to consider what other foods I want to bring in and with what consistency. Like I've decided I'm going to eat shellfish periodically, but most of my reasons for not eating meat aren't purely for animal welfare. It's eating for the climate, eating for the earth. And so I'm shifting away from, so much on the meat side or the dairy side. And I feel great. I feel like I'm getting a really strong nutrient profile. Could almost refer to it as a nutritarian approach to eating. This is something that a term that a few doctors are now using. But just really trying to entice my tastes and discover new flavors and discover new ways of cooking.
Yeah. And why are you eating for the climate? Like, how did that happen?
Well, I've been a sustainability advocate for my whole life, it seems, and diving deeper with this podcast has been one of those avenues. I've learned quite a bit about regenerative agriculture as well. And I'm not saying that animals don't have a place in the whole food cycle. I just personally don't feel the desire or need to keep eating them. So yeah, it's this deep and continual exploration of how we can build a more sustainable future for all people. And to understand that, there are medical doctors who are also out there saying, eat a wide variety of foods. Well, one of the surest ways to eat a wide variety of foods is to really seek to experience different flavors and not eat the same 10 meals every week because so many people just eat the same 10 meals every week and they don't really vary much. So trying to get a variety of foods, exploring food in a different way. And then if you're going to consume meat, looking at them perhaps more as a condiment so that they're not like the main thing on your plate. You're eating more different foods, like more vegetables, more fruits, maybe you're trying a long grain rice from a faraway space, or maybe you're diving into a bread pudding that you've never experienced before or some recipe, just trying something different. And that's really kind of where my exploration's leading me. I'm presently also studying for my PhD in sustainability. So again, I keep learning more about like what it's going to take to feed the 8 billion people on our planet that could grow and peak around 10 billion. And we have to get more creative. We have to think differently about food. And I think that means also, opening ourselves to different types of foods.
So, how are you teaching your boys to eat? What kind of eaters do you want your boys to be?
I want them to love all food. Like that's really it. Yeah. So
Bisquick, and
I want them to experience it. I don't want them to feel like it's something that's guilty, I think that that's the one thing I would hope to have erased from my youth, for them at least, to where, you think about it. It's like my mother stopped buying Kix cereal when I was little because they started adding sugar to it. So the moment they added sugar, we no longer had it. And it meant that when I went to a friend's house, I'd be like, oh, I'm getting Fruit Loops, like it was such a vice. It became a vice. And I don't want food to be a vice for my kids. I want them to experience it. So yes, I will buy Pop-Tarts every now and then, just so they can experience a Pop-Tart and it's not a villainized food. I will, make dumplings at home, but we're going to go out and eat and they're going to have something that's been made with Bisquick. I don't feel a need to cook with it myself, but like that sort of thing, like just not making it something that becomes evil in any way.
Yeah. And if they eat in this way, who do you hope your sons will become as, adults or as human beings? How are you developing them?
I think it's gregarious, loving, and accepting, like willing to explore, see the world.
Yeah.
And not be limited by ideas of what it should be.
Yeah. And I'm just really curious. You're pursuing a PhD in sustainability. That's a huge commitment. And so, is this sustainability in food or sustainability generally?
Well, the degree is at Prescott College, and it's sustainability education specifically as the PhD program. I'm looking at the intersection between food, sustainability, and how we educate. So, like for instance, if you look at how we even talk about food, how we market food, how we bring forward ideas to the marketplace as a whole, how do we decide what is good? All of that, really looking at those questions, at the intersection of those questions.
Wow, this is going to be really interesting.
I figured that we would have an opportunity to potentially collaborate on some of this, especially reviewing your article that is also looking at how, the medical system even considers food as part of that.
I did my first sustainability project back in 2007, and it was for a group of farmers, co-ops. They started hearing about sustainability, I guess, and they wanted to understand how important it was for consumers. And when I led that project, most of the consumers that I talked to didn't even know what sustainability was as a word. They had to look it up in a dictionary, or they took it to mean basic, like sustain life. And so we often ask consumers, and I was running groups for this project. Sometimes we do groups, and I asked them to bring something that represented sustainable food, and they would bring something like a garlic, because garlic makes food taste better. And so it sustains my desire to eat, because I need to eat to live. Or they would bring an apple, to represent food, that you need food to sustain life. I think we've just come a really long way since 2007 in terms of how we understand sustainability. Yeah. I'm curious, what does sustainability mean to you?
I mean, that's a question I ask everybody I talk to.
What have you
So,
learned? Like what?
yeah. So for me, I feel like it's a very personal word. One of my frustrations with the entire category of sustainability now is that there are people that work in this space that essentially don't like the word anymore. Like I even in interviewing Paul Hawken on this podcast back in 2021, he had just come out with a book, Regeneration: Ending the Climate Crisis in One Generation. And he said he didn't like the word sustainability. Like, why are we even using it? We want to sustain this. This is not sustainable. And I think that's a really cynical view. Sustainability as a word has its own like clear definition. It's just been so often co-opted and greenwashed that it's essentially started to lose meaning. But that happens with every word. That happens in language as it exists. Now the hot word, the buzz on the street is all about regeneration, right? Like, so it's not just to sustain, it's to regenerate. And I appreciate that. However, to me, sustainability means all of the things that regeneration means, all of the things that circularity means. It is a word that encompasses, truly respecting life cycle, truly respecting what it takes to create a flourishing environment, to create something that can exist for generations. I mean, that to me is everything that regeneration says it is too. So they're simply different words for the same general concept. Um, I think sustainability just became too much of a buzzword for people that they essentially stopped resonating with it. And in my own way, I just fallen more in love with the concept. I'm not eschewing sustainability. I believe it means things like removing things that are unnatural from the environment, like limiting plastics. I think it means, not relying on petrochemicals for things like creation of fertilizers. Like, why are we using oil to fertilize? This doesn't make sense. Why are we creating chemicals like glyphosate that we use as drying agents, not even as pesticides, so we can harvest wheat all at the same time? Like, why can't we just take a step back and look at things a little bit more holistically, which to me is also what sustainability is about. So I think it's a powerful word.
I agree. I think it's a powerful word too. And at the essence, it means to sustain life. And
Right.
so, some might look at how the consumers were interpreting sustainability back in 2007 to sustain life literally and
Mhm.
say, oh, we need to educate them about what sustainability actually means and for me, I thought they were getting to the essence of it, you know.
Right.
Um,
And it's what it means to you, like, yeah, like I really do. I think it's powerful. So I like that Prescott College hasn't decided to change the name of its program because it's become a less popular word. Um, because we are working to build more sustainable systems. And when you start to look at our entire education system and overhauling that, I mean, whew, the word sustainability means a lot there too. So,
yeah,
yeah.
my current client, I have a current client. They are Organic Valley Cooperative, so
Mm,
active farmers. I'm so happy. They're based out of Wisconsin. And my client took me to show me around the area. I think they were telling me 51% of their farmers are Plains people, Amish,
mhm.
Mennonites. And so he said, hey, we got to go see Amish Walmart. And so he drove me to the Amish Walmart. And basically, it was a store, general store selling salvaged goods.
Mm.
So they had organized all the handles, all the, I don't know, like old milk glasses. It was so neatly organized, but nothing was new. It was all
Oh, interesting. And it was a Walmart.
No, that's the
Okay. I'm
colloquial.
just like,
Let's go to Amish Walmart. Like,
Amish
what
Walmart.
would
Yeah,
Amish
I would
Walmart
shop at
be?
that store.
Yeah,
That's great.
it was incredible. Nothing was
Mm.
new. And in a sense, that truly is sustainability when you're
Yeah.
reusing something for a long period of time. And so I love the word sustainability. How does sustainability taste in your mouth? Could you describe a dish that tastes sustainable?
So, I this is a really interesting question that I might not have time to dive into today. But I'll give you the 30,000-foot view. My first course in this PhD program was on sustainability and theory and practice. And we had to, as part of this course for our final project, really discover the food print. So, like the footprint that your meal would make. And because I'd been on this recent journey, and because this lentil soup that I make, which never tastes the same every time, it's slightly different because I always put something different in it, right? I wanted to make it as local as possible. So I went to a local CSA that has, grows all of their produce in a regenerative capacity here in Santa Cruz County. And I got purple potatoes from them. And I sourced lentils from up near Chico, and also the dried garbanzo beans that I found that are also from California. So I was really trying to make a meal that came from within 100 miles of my door. And I feel like the most sustainable meal is one that looks that hyper local. And so it might just be the fruit that you buy at your farmer's market. I mean, that meal, if it's a meal of fruit or food that you buy at your local farmer's market, or something that you painstakingly sourced the way I did to make something that could have come with ingredients from all across the globe, to make it with love and to enjoy it and respect every ingredient that went into it. Like, that's the most sustainable meal for me.
Yeah. And to me, you just answered the question you tried to ask me, which I had such a hard time answering. That is exactly the ethnographic diet. It's being curious, and it's about transforming your relationships and eating foods you love.
Yeah.
All of this, like what tastes good, what's good to eat, what's sustainable, healthy, regenerate, all of this is what we feel is good.
Yeah. And what if it feels good to you, I think it is good for you.
I agree. So that's it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a perfect place to wrap. I really appreciate your time today. And this interview has been perhaps a little non-traditional and back and forth. You are so comfortable in the ethnographer seat. It's fun to be asked some of the questions myself.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you. Good luck with we need more of your kind of work in the world, Corinna. I'm so excited to see what will come out from your studies right now.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. I'll tell you more about it very soon.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
To find out more about June Jo Lee, her work in food ethnography, and the great children's books that she's producing with her publishing company, please visit our blog page for this episode. It includes the video version of this podcast, complete transcripts, and links to the resources and past episodes that we discussed today. While you visit our website, circleb.co, please join our newsletter. For every new subscriber to our circle, we're planting another tree through our partnership with Forest Planet and 1% for the Planet. Thank you, listeners and watchers, now and always, for being a part of this pod and this community. Because together we really can do so much more. We can care more, we can be better, we can even change our relationship with food and build a sustainable food future for ourselves and all of those around us. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for social good. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and share with your friends to help us reach more people and spread more social good.